Hey, want some chicken today? That's what they said to me at the drive-thru at Raising Cane's the other day. I don't know, I did think it was pretty funny. I think it was clever. Okay, yeah, that's how you're going to feel after you get done doing concrete work. If you've never done it before, you're going to be in for a nice little surprise. Now, I never recommend mixing more than maybe 16 or 20 of the 80-pound bags on your first time. And that's a lot, okay? Even handling those things, if you have a mixer, that's still a lot of concrete, okay? And when it comes down to the numbers here, okay, I know I'm rattling off a bunch of stuff. Let's do this. We're going to build a concrete slab. I'm going to take you guys through the process. Something nice and small for a little patio or sitting area. A lot of people can do it yourselves, but no concrete work for me has ever been easy. So let's get into it. So first off, as you know, a little bit of planning goes a long way. In this case, it wasn't a lot for me. I just made measurements of where I wanted this thing to go. I knew about how big that I wanted it, and I put some orange spray paint marks on the ground. So when I started doing the dirt work, I knew how far to go. Now, you're going to level the ground as much as you can. You first need to decide where do you want the finished level of the concrete slab to be. And if you're going for a 4-inch thick slab, you want to make sure that you bring your dirt down to where the top of the slab will give you 4 inches of thickness to the dirt. On top of that, you typically want to do some kind of footing to make the concrete a little bit stronger, and that's where you're going to dig deeper into the dirt around the slab. Maybe you go 12 inches, maybe you go 8 inches deep. It's really just depending on, I mean, you could engineer this thing to perfection depending on the weight that's going to sit on top of it, but I always just add some kind of a footing so I'm not just making a 4-inch thick slab that's going to crack like a hard pancake or whatever, you know. So that's pretty much what it comes down to. You're going to design this thing yourself when it doesn't really have to hold a lot of weight or some kind of structure. Just do it to the best of your ability and what you think that it needs. So before we get too far in it, I gotta tell you, like, this is a very general, simple way to do a concrete slab. Remember, if you're having a house built or something, you're probably not going to be the person doing this yourself unless you have the education and the skills to design it. You know, there's a lot of things involved, like sometimes piers will get poured. It all depends on your area, the building codes, what kind of soil that you're building on top of. Everything is a factor when it comes to a foundation. All we're doing is a little sitting patio, so you can pretty much do it however you want. But keep in mind, there are a lot of different things you can do, and you might hear things from your friends that are like, oh, well, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. But then again, they don't always know what you're doing. Sometimes they think you're doing something crazy, and really it's just a simple, sitting slab. So just keep those things in mind. There's a lot of really good options as far as base that you could put down first, and ways to prep for the concrete, but it's all just kind of relative to what you need. Now, once you got your ground and your dirt work done, there's a very simple way to form. I mean, you're basically just going to hammer some stakes into the ground, and you're going to put a 2x4 or 2x6, depending on what you need as far as your slab thickness and how you did your dirt work. Basically, for me, I'm usually going to run a string. I'm going to stake a little further with like maybe a metal spike. You can get those things at your home improvement store. Knock a few stakes in the ground, run some strings, and that is the absolute best way to run your form boards, because you can stand back and look and you can tell exactly if your form boards are in line with that string or not. And even if you need to bow it a bit or you need to put in another stake, you hammer these, wooden spikes into the ground and secure your form to it. Now, I'm a big fan of making sure that my spikes or whatever in the ground, I don't want them to be taller than the form, because I like having that room to screed the concrete, and not run into any of those. You don't want them sticking up above your form. I like having a really nice, straight and smooth form top so that I can, finish the concrete as easily as possible. So those are a few things to keep in mind. That's a little bit of a dance. You're going to be leveling those form boards, and a lot of times, if you know where you want let's say in this situation, let's stare at this picture for a second. if you look over to the left where the forming is going to butt right up to the house, I picked the height where I wanted the concrete to stop so that it was a little bit lower than the siding. And what you're going to do for this one is slant just a little bit, maybe an 1/8 or 1/4 inch per foot as you go away. That way the water will drain away from the house. Now, while we're on the topic of leveling, remember, how you level your form is going to be the direct, relation to how the top of your concrete comes out. So if you're doing something like a slab for a hot tub, of course, you're going to need that to be absolutely as level as possible. And you probably want some pretty good footings too, because that's going to be holding some serious weight. Again, with this, since we're just doing a little sitting area, we want it to slant away from the house, and that's why I was saying maybe an 1/8 to 1/4 inch per foot. But really, this is something you're going to be thinking about from the very beginning of the process, because you're going to even do your dirt work depending on where your finished floor is going to end up. So keep those things in mind. The leveling is very important. A lot of times I'm putting some kind of slope to my slabs, unless it's like an inside foundation for a house, or if it's something like I said, a hot tub where you actually want it to be level. But typically you can use a slope to your advantage to make sure that, in the weather, the water goes the way that you want it to go. When it comes to these small foundations, I'm a big fan of rebar. I know you could get the roll of wire mesh or whatever, but for me it's not that big of a deal to cut and tie some rebar. I like the fact that it's thicker. It seems to, be pretty good for helping resist cracks and things like that. And of course, if you're doing a slab bigger than, I don't know, there's just certain times that I'll look at something and say, okay, that needs a dividing line. Like, I'll actually do it in 2 different slabs, or I'll do a saw cut. Because there's just certain sizes of a slab that I feel like you just shouldn't be one piece that big. Or, at least put a line to where if it cracks, it's going to crack there first. And it looks a little bit better that way. So, I'm a big fan of rebar. Also, in this situation, since you're going up against an existing slab, it's always a good idea to dowel into that concrete. So maybe get a 1/2 inch concrete drill bit, drill the holes where your rebar is going to go, and stick some pieces of rebar into that existing slab. That way whenever you pour the new concrete, it's going to harden around those, and it's going to help the two keep from shifting apart. I'm also running a string across so that I can check to make sure the height of the slab is going to be about 4 inches throughout, just in different places of the dirt. It's basically to get a good idea for how my dirt work was done. Now at this time, when you take those measurements, you might find some areas that are still a little high, and maybe that's where you want to go back and adjust a bit. You can see that I went back and adjusted my dirt just to make sure that I got it as close as I could. Now you can choose to add some road base if you want. The clay that I have out here is pretty strong stuff, but it cracks like crazy. So really, if I do road base, it's probably just because I'm thinking if I could seal in a little bit more moisture and make it to where the dirt doesn't dry out as quick under the slab, that might help a little. But I feel like the road base is just a good finishing thing for me. I'll go grab a little load of it just so I can have some to use, and to me it just makes me kind of feel like I'm doing the job right. I don't know how necessary that it is, but that's what I add here, and get all that rebar tied up, and we're pretty much ready to pour. Now on my rebar, I think I'm pretty much doing a simple 1 foot spacing. Now if I'm doing something a little bit bigger, like when I did the slab for this guest house that we're building up against, I put double rebar. I might have went, every 4 or 6 inches right in the footings, just to put, 2 or 3 of them kind of next to each other and make those footings extra strong. But for the most part, going in that grid pattern, 1 foot spacings both ways is, usually seems to be a pretty good way. So a big part of this job is trying to get the right amount of concrete. If you're going to call in a truck, typically it's not worth it if you're doing less than, even 3 yards of concrete, they're probably going to charge you extra for a trip charge. If you're buying 5 yards, typically there's no extra trip charge, but you know, a truck is the way to go if you're using that much. Now, even at 3 yards of concrete, I don't want to mix with 80-pound bags. I hate mixing 80-pound bags. Of course, I have to do it sometimes. I want to say this slab might have ended up taking me somewhere around 46, but it's been a while since I actually did this project. So what you want to do, if you're going to mix by bags, you can go on the Google, you know, page and basically search concrete calculator. And, well, whether it's going to be bags or a truck, you can calculate how much concrete that you need pretty accurately. It's going to ask you to put in, you know, the dimensions of the slab. Now what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll put in my footings, because it does give you a calculator for footings. I'll put in the footings and do that first, and any beams that I might have, and then I'll subtract that from the rest of the slab that's going to be just 4 inches thick. So basically you put it down on paper. If you're doing a real simple one, figure out how much concrete you need for that perimeter footing, and then figure out how much is left in the center for your 4, 5, or 6 inch thick slab, whatever you're doing. And you can actually get really close. As crazy as it seems, that concrete calculator is very accurate. And there have been times I've literally said, okay, you know what? I need a 10-yard truck. Matter of fact, when we did this guest house that I'm building next to, I had a 10-yard truck that came out, and literally the second the guy poured the last bit of concrete right at the edge, he said this, like, we're out, and my guys were there with me. We were screeding, and we literally had just enough to fill in the last little bit, and just the tiny little bits that had run over the sides we might grab and touch up here and there. But it was crazy how close that I was able to calculate that. Now, of course, I wanted the 10-yard truck, but I think I even adjusted, if I thought I was going to have a little too much, I think I went and adjusted a footing and made it like a tiny bit deeper or something, just so it would be close. Now, I can't say I'd ever get that close again. It was actually pretty amazing, and I know my buddies were impressed. They were like, did you do that on purpose? And I was like, yeah, I kind of did, but didn't think it was going to be that close. Anyway, with the bags, you can do the same, because that concrete calculator will tell you how many yards of concrete that you need, or how many 80-pound bags. And I want to say it'll also give you how many 60 or 50-pound bags that you need. So you can get really, really close. Again, just go to Google, type in concrete calculator, and I want to say it's a page called Concrete Network. And it's a real easy to use, you know, simple calculator. You put in your dimensions, and that's going to help you get the amount of concrete that you need. Typically, if you're going with bags, you definitely want to buy a few extras, just so if you miscalculated, you're not running out right at the end of the job. Also, a few things to consider if you plan on needing a concrete truck. A lot of times you've got to order it a few days in advance. So depending on your area and what's available, you need to call your local concrete supplier and say, hey, how many days in advance do you need? Also, you know, ask the prices and all that good stuff. A lot of times these companies want you to be able to unload the truck pretty quick. Like, they might tell you you have 1 hour to unload the truck. So if you need equipment, say that you're doing a slab in the backyard of somebody's house, and I mean even a couple yards or something, like, man, make sure that you've got like a mini skid steer or something, because you're going to want to be able to transport that concrete from the front to the back, easily be able to dump it, have one of your friends kind of moving it around. You don't want this to take very long. I've gotten myself into trouble before with that, trying to use 3 people or 2 people with wheelbarrows, and let me tell you, it is a lot more work than you think. Don't do it, especially if it's more than like 1 yard. I mean, even, I want to say this might have been like 4 yards or something, and there were 2 or 3 of us with wheelbarrows, and it just about killed us. But we ended up getting it done. It's just that never again. The guy ended up being there for like 2.5 hours. Luckily, they didn't charge us extra for the truck. But that was really in the early days of me learning about concrete work. And man, I'm going to tell you, like, those are mistakes that I don't want to make again. I would rather charge the customer an extra $300 or $400 to rent a mini skid steer for the day and have that ready to go so that we can transport that concrete to the back easily. Now, there's a few different ways you can get the rebar to set right in the middle of your concrete slab as far as the vertical spacing goes. You know, for bigger slabs, you'll use something like rebar chairs, and you can buy these little plastic stands, and you put them every so often to get the rebar to set up at the perfect height, so it's pretty much right between your slab. When I do something small like this, it's easy enough to pour some concrete and lift the rebar up, and you can actually reach your hands in there. You can do it where the rebar is still exposed, and you can see when you're about halfway up the depth of the concrete. And that's a pretty easy thing to get right on these smaller slabs. Okay, your rebar is going to be tied together with wire ties, so you can get this grid, you know, to basically hold itself together. And when you pull it up, it'll all come very easily. It's just you can kind of adjust it and then pour some more concrete, adjust it as you go. And you'll find that that way works really well for these small slabs. That way you don't have to have those little plastic chairs embedded in your concrete. And I feel like to some degree those might weaken it in some places, but I mean not too bad. It's just, you know, the less... I feel like it's keeping your concrete a little bit more solid, I guess, instead of having these little plastic chairs in there permanently. So that's one way to get the spacing or the height of the rebar correct inside the concrete when you pour. Now, once you've got enough concrete in there, this is the fun part, and I'm going to tell you guys, concrete finishers are amazing. Okay, it's a work of art to be able to finish concrete and to do it efficiently and fast. Man, this is one of the most artistic things, even though all you're trying to do is make a big flat surface. It's a lot more difficult than you think. Now, for those of us DIY people out there, the best thing I could tell you to do is if you're doing a slab that you can handle by yourself and it's not super wide, you need to pre-cut a 2x4 that goes the whole width of your slab, but it overlaps onto your form. Because the best way that's worked for me is to take the 2x4, lay it from one side of the form to the other, and screed, moving, of course, you know, the long way, but you want to saw it back and forth like this as you go. And also, if you're moving this way, you want to tilt that 2x4 back just a little, because you want the 2x4 to work the concrete like this. Okay, if you're doing it like this, it's almost like you're digging it out and you're going to leave holes back here. So you want to tilt the 2x4 back at a small angle and saw it about a ½ an inch, just almost like you're wiggling it, because you don't want one side to fall off the form and fall into the concrete, you know, and if it does, then you're just going to have to add some and, you know, kind of start over in that part. So if you can get really good at this sawing motion and work all the way down that form, you're going to come out with a pretty nice finish just at that. I mean, you could literally walk away from it at that point and you could probably see it and say, wow, that actually looks pretty good and smooth. Now, when you really want to make it nicer, that's where you get into the bull float and the different floats and things like that, you know, or even doing the broom finish. But I've done it before where I used that 2x4 trick, I screeded the whole thing, got it as good as I could get it, and then let it start to cure up, and then came back a little bit later once the water was dried off the top, and I was able to do a really super light broom finish. And I couldn't have asked for better as far as not having a bull float. Now I do have a bull float. I run it back and forth a little bit, but I'm going to tell you, I'm still not perfect at it. I can do good enough to pass and to make it work, but I'm definitely nowhere near as good as some of these guys that have the experience and the proper training for finishing concrete.
And the road ahead is dark. They'll try to kick you while you're down. They want to rise up while you drown. They want to fill your head with doubt. They're silently scared that you'll figure it out. I'll make it look like I'm losing. Won't bother hiding my bruises.
A lot of people don't attempt this, but I can't get these voids at the top, so I'm going to try and see if I can add a little bit of mortar.
Now, once I got done with the bull float, all I really had to do was go back with my little corner and edge finishing trowel, and it's basically a little flat one, but it has one side that curves down to a 90. It's a nice curve, and you just go around the thing if you want to go around the perimeter of it, and it gives you a nice round edge and gives you a nice little flat spot. Of course, you can broom that out, but I kind of like to leave it. I think I actually broomed this one before I used the trowel, and I think it makes kind of a nice edge, almost like a little frame, so I was okay with that. And that pretty much finishes this one up. You know, it's not going to be a real concrete job unless you get pretty dirty. So, also there's a, you know, I got a little finished picture at the end. I built my chairs a little bigger because I eventually want to move them to my other patio. But for now I set them out there just to kind of get a picture and put them somewhere. So I hope this helped you guys out if you're looking to do a small concrete slab. And feel free to throw comments and ask me some questions if you got them. Thank you guys again, and stay tuned, subscribe, and like for the next one. See you out there.